Assalamu alaikum students, this is Dr. Haseeb. Last week we discussed the sense of pain, and today we are going to discuss another very important sensation, thermal sensation. So by the end of today's session, inshallah you will be able to classify thermoreceptors. What are thermoreceptors? What are different types of thermoreceptors and what are the properties of these receptors? We have already discussed the anterolateral spinothalamic pathway responsible for transmission of pain, temperature, and crude touch. Today, we are going to focus on the sensation of temperature only, and we will discuss how temperature sensations are carried via the lateral spinothalamic tract. Then we will discuss Brown-Sequard syndrome, trigeminal neuralgia, shingles, and then at the end we will uh, discuss few types of headache. So these are the learning objectives for today's session. So let's start. So thermoreceptors are type of mechanoreceptors. Sense of temperature change can be classified as a mechanical change. We can classify these thermoreceptors in three types. Those responsible for detection of cold sensation are labeled as cold receptors. Similarly, we have warmth receptors and some of the pain receptors, they are also included as thermoreceptors. Mind you, there is some overlapping between the pain receptors and thermal receptors. We will discuss the overlapping. If we see the examples of warmth and cold receptors, Ruffini's and organs are responsible for detection of warm sensation. Similarly, crosses and bulbs are responsible for detection of cold. So these are the classical examples of cold receptors and warm receptors. Ruffini's for warm and crosses for cold. Then we have other types of channels known as TRP channels or transient receptor potential channels. And there are subtypes of TRP channels which are classified as V1 to V4. All these transient receptor potential channels are warmth receptors. Similarly, transient receptor potential M8 and A1 channels are for detection of cold sensations. So there is overlapping between nociceptors and thermoreceptors. We have discussed receptors for cold sensation and receptors for warm sensation. But at the extremes of temperature, at either extreme, whether very cold or very warm, there are some pain receptors involved. And we can also classify these pain receptors under the category of thermoreceptors. So the thing to remember is these nociceptors are simulated by extremes of temperature, either very hot or very cold. So extreme or freezing cold sensation or very hot or burning hot sensation may stimulate these nociceptors, and these nociceptors are of thermal nature. So to summarize, the three types of thermoreceptors are cold receptors, warmth receptors, and pain receptors. Ruffini for warm sensation, Krause for cold sensation. Similarly, TRP channels V1 to V4 are for warm sensations, M8 and A1 for cold sensations. These are the transient receptor potential channels. Now there are some important facts that you must remember about these thermoreceptors. Both the cold receptors and warmth receptors, you must know the location. They are located immediately under the skin at separate spots. And another fact is that there are 3 to 10 times as many cold spots as warm spots. This means the number of cold receptors is 3 to 10 times as great as warm receptors. And the number of these receptors, they vary according to the location. For example, if we discuss the cold spots per centimeter square, you can see high number in face or mouth, especially at lips. Similarly, 3 to 5 cold spots per centimeter square in fingers. However, the number is much less than 1 cold spot per centimeter square in areas of trunk. So not only there are varying number of cold and warmth receptors, but according to the location of the body, the number is variable as well. Now this figure is taken from your textbook. You can see temperature change on the abscissa or the x-axis, and this is the sensitivity or impulses per second on the ordinate axis or the y-axis. And you can see variable response of these thermoreceptors. At one extreme on the left hand side of your screen is the sense of freezing cold, and the other extreme on the right hand side is burning hot sensation, and in the middle we have indifferent sensation. So from freezing cold to burning hot, these thermoreceptors, they respond differently. So each type of thermoreceptor, you say, each type of thermoreceptor respond at a specific temperature range. For example, the receptors for cold, they are sensitive at a temperature range between 10 to 40 degrees centigrade, and the peak is at the level of around 24 to 25 degrees centigrade. So at 25 degrees centigrade, you can see maximum sensitivity of cold receptors, and beyond 25, beyond 30, the impulse rate progressively declines as indicated by the downward slope, the blue curve. So this blue curve, this shows the response of cold receptor. Now you see the red dotted line. This is the sensitivity or the impulse rate or the discharge rate of warmth receptors. And you can see the peak is around 40 to 45 degrees centigrade. And beyond 50 degrees centigrade, no response by the warmth receptors. Now the sensation of heat pain has started. This is the extreme sensation, burning hot sensation. And the sensations are carried by different type of receptors. Now, as we have discussed, there is overlapping between thermoreceptors and pain receptors. Beyond 50 degrees centigrade, there is contribution by the nociceptors as well. Similarly, if we go beyond 15 degrees centigrade or beyond 10 degrees centigrade, on the opposite side, to the left side, in freezing cold sensation, you can see contribution of the cold pain receptors. Again, these are nociceptors. So nociceptors are at the extremes of temperature. Cold pain receptors at freezing cold sensation less than 10 degrees centigrade, and heat pain receptors for burning hot sensation beyond 50 degrees centigrade. The cold receptors and the warmth receptors, Ruffini for warmth and Krause for cold, they are sensitive at variable temperature ranges. Peak for cold receptors is at 24, peak for warmth receptors is at 45 degrees centigrade. So to summarize, different types of thermoreceptors, they respond at a specific temperature range. Like any other sensory receptor, these thermoreceptors, they also exhibit the phenomenon of adaptation. You have already learned the phenomenon of receptor adaptation. By adaptation, we mean decline in the response of a receptor to a stimulus. Now, this decreased response of receptor can be gradual in nature or it can be of sudden onset. So, thermoreceptors, they adapt to some degree, but they do not adapt 100%, right? So we know that the Ruffini's end organs, these thermoreceptors are slowly adapting receptors. Remember, Ruffini's end organs are slowly adapting receptors. Unlike the receptors for cold sensation, the crosses and bulbs. Crosses and bulbs, they are rapidly adapting receptors. So the adaptation phenomenon is different. The receptors, the thermoreceptors, they adapt to a certain degree, but never 100%. And the thing to remember is that these thermoreceptors, they respond markedly to sudden change in temperature. Sudden change in temperature will stimulate these thermoreceptors, and this sudden change can be in either direction, from burning hot sensation to cold or vice versa. So these thermoreceptors, they do exhibit the phenomenon of adaptation, but some adapt slowly, some adapt rapidly. Especially these thermoreceptors, they markedly respond to sudden temperature changes, whether sudden cold sensation or sudden warm sensation, but they never adapt 100%. So once the stimulus has been detected by these thermoreceptors, how this stimulus will activate the receptors, or you can say what is the mechanism behind the stimulation of thermal receptors. And whenever there is a stimulus, whether cold or warm stimulus, this stimulus will change the metabolic rate of the receptors, because this temperature change will alter the intracellular chemical reactions. The metabolic rate is changing. So temperature changes, it not causes direct physical effect on the thermoreceptor endings, but the stimulation is via the chemical mechanism. Chemical stimulation of the endings is there as modified by temperature change. So whenever there is temperature stimulus, it will alter the metabolic rate, it will alter the intracellular chemical reactions. Another property exhibited by thermoreceptor is the phenomenon of spatial summation. We have already discussed the types of summation, the two types, frequency summation or temporal summation, and the other type is spatial summation. So the spatial summation is exhibited by the thermoreceptors, and it is very difficult to judge the gradations of temperature when the stimulated skin area is small. However, when a large skin area is stimulated all at once, then the thermal signals from the entire area they summate. So this is known as spatial summation. So to summarize, if a small area of the skin is affected, this will not be detected easily. However, if a large area is detected, it will be stimulated easily. Black text against yellow background is the easiest of all. It is much easier to read black text against yellow background. That is the reason yellow color is used by the traffic signs as well. Now we will discuss the anterolateral pathway. We have already compared the two types, dorsal column medial lemniscal pathway, anterolateral pathway. Both are ascending pathways. Both carry different sets of stimulation. We will not go into the details of the DCML tract today, as we have discussed the anterolateral system already. The lateral spinothalamic tract is responsible for transmission of pain and temperature, whereas anterior spinothalamic tract is responsible for transmission of crude touch. And collectively, anterolateral spinothalamic tract is labeled as the anterolateral system. So we will focus on the thermal sensations only. We will not go into the details of other sensations. We have already discussed that. We will focus on the thermal sensation carried by the lateral spinothalamic tract. So the collective term is anterolateral pathway, which carries the anterior carries the sensation of crude touch and pressure, crude touch and firm pressure, and the lateral spinothalamic tract carries pain and temperature. We have discussed the neospinothalamic pathway for fast pain. We have discussed the paleospinothalamic pathway for slow pain. Today we are going to focus on the temperature sensation carried by the lateral spinothalamic tract. Now this figure is taken from your textbook. You can see the cross section of the spinal cord. This inner region is the gray matter. This butterfly shaped region is the gray matter enclosed within the outer white matter. And you can see the dorsal horns and the ventral horns. These are the dorsal horns and this is the ventral horn on each side. And this is the commissure slightly towards the anterior end of the spinal cord, known as the anterior commissure of the spinal cord. Now this commissure connects the dorsal and ventral horn of one side to the opposite side. And within the dorsal horn, you can see there are different layers or laminae. And these laminae of the spinal cord gray matter are denoted by the capital Roman numerals. As you can see, lamina 1 known as the lamina marginalis, lamina 2 and 3 collectively known as the substantia gelatinosa. And you can see different types of tracts, ascending pathways. Some of them they remain ipsilateral, some of them they cross to the opposite side like this through the anterior commissure. So these crossing fibers, these are the anterolateral pathways. They cross at the level of spinal cord through the anterior commissure to the opposite side. We have already discussed this. The anterior and lateral spinothalamic pathways running parallel to each other, ascending towards the brainstem. After crossing over, they ascend towards the medulla oblongata, pons, and midbrain, and eventually reach the thalamus. And this is the site of termination, the cerebral cortex. So like any other pathway, the anterolateral spinothalamic pathway, it starts from the stimulus. And there are different types of receptors for specific stimulus. Cross is for cold, roughen is for warm, free nerve ending is for crude touch and pain sensation. As is the case with dorsal column medial lemniscal pathway, the other ascending pathway, anterolateral pathway has the same first order neurons, the dorsal root ganglion. You can see the dorsal root ganglion. This is the cut section. You can see the spinal nerve. This is the spinal nerve. Each spinal nerve has an anterior root and a posterior root. Within the posterior root of the spinal nerve, there is a cluster of neuronal cell bodies. This cluster is known as the ganglion. Since it is present within the spinal nerve, it is known as spinal ganglion, and the other name for spinal ganglion is posterior root ganglion, or more commonly dorsal root ganglion. From here, from this ganglion, the axons of first order neurons will arise. They will terminate at the second order neurons, which are present in the dorsal gray horn of the spinal cord. This is the site for decussation. The fibers will cross through the anterior commissure to the opposite white column, and these are the second order neurons. And the axons of second order neurons will ascend to the thalamus and eventually terminate in the somatosensory cortex. So, how thermal transmission takes place via the lateral spinothalamic tract? We will go step by step. We will start with the stimulus. For temperature sensation, the stimulus can be either cold or warm. So this stimulus is detected by specific receptors. There are specific receptors for warm sensation. We have discussed different types of transient receptor potential channels. V1 to V4 are all are for warm sensation. Similarly, roughened and organs, they are also responsible for detection of warmth sensation. Then we have receptors for cold sensation. The crosses and bulbs are responsible for detection of cold sensation. Similarly, the transient receptor potential channels M8 and A1, they are for cold. Remember the names. TRP stands for transient receptor potentials, and the last alphabet or the last letter indicates V for vanilloid, M for menthol, and A for ankyrin. These are the type of TRP channels. So once the receptor has been stimulated, the signal will be carried by a specific type of nerve fiber. There are specific nerve fibers for cold sensation and specific nerve fiber for warm sensation. Just like for fast pain and slow pain, we discussed in neospinothalamic tract and paleospinothalamic tract that for fast pain we have A delta fibers, and for slow pain we have type C fibers. Same is the case for thermal sensation. For cold sensation, the same A delta fibers are responsible. And for warm sensation, the same type C unmyelinated nerve fibers are responsible. So cold sensations are carried by the A delta fibers. These A delta fibers are myelinated. They have larger diameter and the conduction velocity is relatively higher. On the other side, the warm sensation is carried by the type C fibers. The type C fibers are also known as slow fibers. These are not myelinated. The diameter is relatively smaller than the A delta fibers. Hence, the conduction velocity is lesser as well. As we know, the conduction velocity is directly proportional to the diameter of the nerve fiber. Greater the diameter, greater the conduction velocity, and vice versa. Now these fibers, A delta fibers and unmyelinated type C fibers, they will carry the sensation of cold and warm to the dorsal root ganglion. And this is the site for the first order neurons. The neurons will arise from the dorsal root ganglion, and these neurons are labeled as the first order neurons, dorsal root ganglion or the spinal ganglion. So I have a question regarding the TRP channels. TRP stands for transient receptor potential channels, and these channels, they are type of nociceptors. Number one, they are also responsible for detection of thermal sensation. Number two, this means there is overlapping between nociception, that is pain sensation, and thermal sensation. The last letter V1 or V2 or V3, this indicates the type of sensation which is carried by the receptor. Where V1 stands for vanilloid. Vanilloid is the agent or the substance which is present in capsaicin. Now, where capsaicin is responsible for pepper hot sensation, pepper hot or red chili hot sensation, burning hot sensation. So, for for vanilloid sensation or pepper hot or red chili hot sensation, we have V1 TRP channels. The opposite M8 and A1, these are for cold sensation, for other extreme, where encheirin stand is for A and menthol is for M8. M stands for menthol or extremely, sorry, M stands for menthol, where menthol is for extreme cold sensation. So the first order neurons will arise from the dorsal root ganglion. Now these axons will enter the dorsal gray horn of the spinal cord, and through the tract of Lizor, they will terminate at specific laminae. We have discussed the multiple laminae which are present in the gray horn: lamina 1, lamina 2, and lamina 3, where 2 and 3 are collectively known as substantia gelatinosa. So from here, the axons of the second order neurons will arise. And this is the site for decussation. The decussation occurs within the spinal cord, unlike the DCML pathways, in which decussation takes place at the level of medulla. In anterolateral spinothalamic tracts, decussation takes place at the level of spinal cord. So they cross over to the opposite side through the anterior commissure, and then they ascend as the anterolateral spinothalamic tract. They run parallel to each other. The lateral spinothalamic tract lies slightly medial to the anterior spinothalamic tract. So lateral is for pain temperature, anterior is for crude touch. So all the fibers that ascend through the anterior commissure as the anterolateral tract, they will terminate in the reticular areas of the brainstem and the thalamus. Inside the thalamus, we have the third order neurons. Remember T for thalamus, T for third order neurons. So most of the thermal sensations, they terminate in the brainstem and thalamus. Most of them. Only few of the fibers, only few of these signals are transmitted towards the final destination, that is the cerebral cortex, somatosensory cortex. Few fibers. This is the difference. Most of the pain, most of the thermal signals, they terminate within the brainstem and thalamus. The remaining, they ascend from the thalamus, from the ventroposterolateral nucleus or the VBL, ventrobasal complex. They are carried through the internal capsule and the corona radiata to the final destination, that is somatosensory cortex. So this slide is very important. We have started from the stimulus till the final destination. Stimulus, whether warm or cold, will be detected by specific receptors for warm sensation, specific receptors for cold sensation. Not only the receptors are specific, the fibers are specific as well. A delta fibers for cold, type C for warm. DRG is the site of first order neuron. Dorsal gray horn is the site of second order neuron, where the decussation takes place. And most of the fibers of thermal sensations, they terminate in the brainstem and thalamus. So we have completed the ascending pathways. We have discussed the dorsal column medial lemniscal pathway. We have discussed the anterolateral spinothalamic pathway. Both are ascending pathways. Both are sensory pathways of the spinal cord. Now we will discuss a clinical syndrome known as Brown-Sequard syndrome, named after the Mauritian scientist Brown-Sequard. So what is Brown-Sequard syndrome? This is, in simple words, hemisection of the spinal cord. I repeat, this is hemisection of spinal cord. By hemisection of spinal cord, we mean there is lesion or there is damage to lateral side of the spinal cord on one side. So if there is damage, if there is lesion on the lateral side of the spinal cord on one side, whether left or right, this will lead to multiple signs in the patient, and thus collection of these signs and symptoms is known as Brown-Sequard syndrome. Here you can see the cross section of this inner gray matter and the outer yellow matter. You can see different types of pathways. Some are ipsilateral, some are going to the contralateral side. You can see the anterolateral spinothalamic tract. These are the anterolateral spinothalamic tract. So if there is lesion at the lateral side on one side of the spinal cord, this is labeled as hemisection, or half of the spinal cord is damaged. So whenever there is such an injury, this will lead to Brown-Sequard syndrome. And these are the different signs which are present on the ipsilateral and contralateral side of the body in Brown-Sequard syndrome. Although this table looks a bit complicated, but it is not that complicated. You can see ipsilateral side on the left side and the contralateral side on the right hand side. So we are going to discuss the signs, sensory changes as well as motor changes on the same side and the sensory and motor changes on the opposite side. So whenever there is hemisection of the spinal cord or half of the spinal cord is damaged, this will lead to certain signs and symptoms in the ipsilateral side and certain signs and symptoms on the contralateral side. And some of the signs are more prominent at the level of the lesion, whether ipsilateral or contralateral. Similarly, some of the signs are more prominent below the level of lesion, whether ipsilateral or contralateral. So before going into the details, one thing to remember is that the anterolateral spinothalamic pathway is responsible for transmission of pain, temperature, and crude touch. I repeat, anterolateral spinothalamic tract is responsible for transmission of pain, temperature, and crude touch. Rest of the sensory sensations like fine touch, tactile localization, two-point discrimination, vibration, stereognosis, graphesthesia, all these sensory sensations, they are transmitted by the DCML pathway, dorsal column medial lemniscal pathway. So if the DCML pathway is damaged, all the sensations carried by it will be lost. Similarly, if the anterolateral pathway is damaged, the sensations of pain, temperature, and crude touch will be lost. So it depends on the type of pathway which is damaged, whether on the same side or on the opposite side. As far as the signs present below the level of lesion is concerned, these are the sensory changes. If we see all the sensations carried by the DCML pathway, they are lost. Below the level of lesion, all the sensations carried by the DCML pathway, they are lost. However, the anterolateral spinothalamic pathway, all the sensations carried by them, they are retained. So if we compare the sensory changes with this opposite side, it is reverse. The sensations carried by the anterolateral spinothalamic tract like pain, temperature, and crude touch, they are lost, and those carried by the DCML pathway, they are retained. So if the lesion is on one side of the spinal cord, if there is hemisection of the spinal cord, and what you are going to observe is below the level of lesion, all the sensations carried by the anterolateral spinothalamic tract, they will be lost. Now, if we discuss the motor changes, we have discussed the two types of motor neuron lesions, the upper motor neuron lesion and the lower motor neuron lesion. All the neurons of the cerebral cortex and the brain stem, they are the upper motor neurons, whereas the neurons of the spinal cord, the anterior horn of the spinal cord, anterior gray horn, all the neurons of anterior gray horn of the spinal cord, these are the lower motor neurons. So below the level of lesion, the upper motor neurons are damaged. Hence, there will be upper motor neuron type of paralysis. At the level of lesion, the lower motor neuron are damaged. So there will be lower motor neuron type of paralysis. on the same side. The thing to remember is that there are no motor changes in the contralateral side, whether at the level of lesion or below the level of lesion. So no paralysis will be there in the contralateral side, neither at the level nor below the level of lesion. However, there are motor neuron damage, or you can say upper motor neuron lesion below the level and lower motor neuron lesion at the level. So at the level, there is lower motor neuron lesion. So upper motor neurons are the neurons of cerebral cortex and the brainstem. The lower motor neurons are the neurons of anterior gray horn of spinal cord. So you can see in upper motor neuron lesion, the tone is increased. In lower motor neuron lesion, the muscle tone is suppressed. Similarly, in upper motor neuron lesion, there is spastic paralysis as compared to flaccid paralysis in lower motor neuron lesion. So, so if we compare the upper and lower motor neuron lesion, you can see increased tone in upper motor neuron lesion, hypertonia is there, and hypo in lower motor neuron. So spastic paralysis versus flaccid paralysis. Another important thing is the deep tendon reflexes or stretch reflexes. So exaggerated stretch reflexes in upper motor neuron lesion and Babinski sign will be there as well. Similarly, the stretch reflexes will be lost in lower motor neuron lesion. The deep tendon reflexes are suppressed. On the other hand, there is muscle atrophy in lower motor neuron lesion, no atrophy in upper motor neuron lesion. So this is the mnemonic. In upper motor neuron lesion, everything is going up. The muscle tone is up. The deep tendon reflexes, they are exaggerated, and the toes, they move upwards. This indicates positive Babinski sign. In lower motor neuron lesion, everything is going down. There is lower muscle mass, there is muscle atrophy, the muscle tone is low as well. The deep tendon reflexes are suppressed as well, and Babinski sign is down going as well. Remember, there is positive Babinski sign in infants normally. So in Brown-Sequard syndrome, these are the sets of sensory and motor changes on same side and contralateral side. The easiest way to remember is that there is lower motor neuron type of paralysis at the level of lesion and upper motor neuron type paralysis below the level of lesion. These are the motor changes. No motor changes on the contralateral side. Number one. Number two is the sensory changes. So the anterolateral spinal pathway is lost on the contralateral side, whether at the level or below the level of lesion. So pain, temperature, crude touch sensations are lost on the contralateral side. However, below the level of lesion, these anterolateral tracts are spared and DCML are lost. However, at the level of lesion, there is complete anesthesia. So in Brown-Sequard syndrome, most of the sensory and motor changes are observed whether at the level of lesion or below the level of lesion. There are no prominent changes above the level of lesion. There are no prominent changes above the level of lesion, but some hyperesthesia may be there in some cases. So usually there is no change above the level of lesion, but in some cases hyperesthesia may be there. or twitching of muscle may be there. And the reason is the irritation of the neighboring DRG or the posterior nerve roots. So to conclude, Brown-Sequard syndrome is hemisection of spinal cord. Whenever there is lesion side of the spinal cord in one end, whether left or right, this will lead to set of changes sensory and motor on the same side and on the contralateral side at the level of lesion and below the level of lesion. And sometimes spinal cord trauma, spinal cord injury, or spinal cord tumor may lead to Brown-Sequard syndrome. And sometimes these patients of Brown-Sequard syndrome, they respond to a certain degree with steroid therapy. So we have discussed Brown-Sequard syndrome. The next clinical condition is known as trigeminal neuralgia. The other name is tic douloureux. Tic douloureux. Douloureux is the French terminology. Tic is for muscle tics or muscle twitch. Douloureux means painful or sore. So painful twitches in the trigeminal region is known as tic douloureux or trigeminal neuralgia. You must have read in your anatomy classes that trigeminal nerve, the fifth cranial nerve, tri means three, geminal for three branches. So there are three divisions of the fifth cranial nerve, V1, V2, and V3. If you remember, the ophthalmic division, the maxillary division, and the mandibular division of the trigeminal nerve. So if there is painful twitching in the areas of the trigeminal nerve, this is known as trigeminal neuralgia. And the pain is excruciating, usually over one side of the body. And these patients, they experience repetitive, severe, and brief episodes of pain, just like sudden electrical shocks. So pain is repetitive, severe, and brief, and it is usually over the surface of the face where the trigeminal supply is there. When we use the term tic douloureux, we are referring to trigeminal neuralgia, that is fifth cranial nerve. But according to your textbook, glossopharyngeal nerve can also be involved, which is the ninth cranial nerve. So how this pain or painful twitch can be corrected or treated? There is one way: we can block the peripheral nerve by cutting it surgically. So it will give some sort of relief. So to summarize, trigeminal neuralgia is painful muscle twitch over the sensory distribution area of the fifth cranial nerve, and this pain is of sudden onset, it is repetitive and brief, and it can be treated by surgically cutting the peripheral nerve from that specific hypersensitive area. Here you can see the dermatomal supply of the trigeminal nerve, V1, the ophthalmic, V2, the maxillary, and V3, the mandibular area. So this is the sensory supply of the trigeminal nerve. Neuralgia means neuronal pain. Trigeminal neuralgia, neuronal pain from the trigeminal nerve. Now what is herpes zoster? The other term for herpes zoster is shingles. So herpes virus is responsible for herpes zoster, and this virus, this infects the DRG, dorsal root ganglion, which is present in the posterior root of the spinal cord. So this virus will infect the DRG. So when the DRG is infected, there will be severe pain in the dermatomal supply of the dorsal root ganglion, and such pain will start circling around the body, and we call it as herpes zoster or shingles, because after the infection there is skin infection or skin eruption as well. So when there is infection with this virus, the dorsal root ganglion is involved and the neuronal cells are destroyed. So the pain neuronal cells that are located within the DRG, they are destroyed by the virus. Hence, all the dermatomal supply served by the dorsal root ganglion will be affected, and there will be skin eruption as well. You can see this is how shingles looks like. This is the herpes zoster infection. These are different vesicles. Multiple vesicles are formed in any area of the body. So the herpes virus is responsible for infection of dorsal root ganglion. When the dorsal root ganglion is infected, the pain neuronal cells are destroyed, which are located within the ganglion, and specific region, specific dermatomal region will be involved, and you may observe multiple vesicles or skin eruptions in the body. So we have discussed Brown-Sequard syndrome, trigeminal neuralgia, and herpes zoster. The last clinical condition is headache. In simple words, pain in the head. So now this headache can be of intracranial origin or extracranial origin. Painful stimulus arising within the cranium, within the head, and if the stimulus is outside the cranium, this is extracranial headache. So we can classify the types of headache as intracranial and extracranial. If the stimulus is within the head, we will label it as intracranial headache. If the stimulus is located outside the head, outside the cranium, we will label it as extracranial headache. For example, headache of meningitis, inflammation of the meninges. This is an example of intracranial headache. Similarly, headache due to low CSF pressure. Again, this is intracranial headache. So you will perform lumbar puncture procedure in your house job, inshallah. This is a very simple procedure in which the patient is asked to sit down on a couch and you expose the trunk area and you insert the lumbar puncture needle through the spinal cord and you take out the sample of the cerebrospinal fluid. This procedure is known as lumbar puncture, and you will perform this procedure daily in your house job, at least one in a day. So most of the patients after the procedure they complained of headache. So this headache is due to low CSF pressure. So when you remove some of the CSF volume from the patients they complain certain degree of headache, and this headache is again of intracranial origin. Similarly, the migraine is also intracranial headache, headache due to alcohol intoxication or any other drug is again intracranial headache. Now, if the stimulus is outside the cranium, outside the head, such headache will be labeled as extracranial headache. For example, headache resulting, right? Now, if the source of stimulus is located within the nasal cavity, again extracranial headache. If the source of stimulus is located inside the eye, again extracranial headache. So depending on the site of stimulus or the source of stimulus, we can classify headaches as intracranial or extracranial. So this is all for today's session. We still have a minute or two. If there are any questions, you can text me. A sincere advice for you is please do not take these lectures lightly. Kindly take these lectures very seriously. Thank you. One of the students complained about the color of the slides, black text against yellow background. I thought it was the easiest of all to pick. But if still you are having some sort of difficulty, I can change it to white. Thank you. So no more questions? All right. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.